trends have been seen back in fashion in recent years. Items such as this vintage cardigan that you probably would have seen your mum wear in the 80s are more popular than ever. Students are now choosing vintage over the high street, but why? I'm Olivia Wilson, and today I'm going to answer the question as to why vintage fashion is still so popular today. The media and popular culture are saturated in what appears to be a vintage craze, with TV programmes such as Peaky Blinders displaying beautiful 20s fashion and fashion bloggers pushing this trend online, with videos including how to dress vintage only a click away. Vintage shops too are making big bucks selling their decades-old items to customers wanting to hop on this vintage bandwagon.
I think it's better for the environment, more people are getting into it, it's becoming more fashionable.
I think with like the rise in subcultures from like the 70s, a lot of people have like tried to bring in their own individual style. A lot of people don't want to look like carbon copies of each other anymore.
Blogger Azif Lone suggests that vintage is still popular because it creates a sense of nostalgia for those who wear it, of a supposed golden age running from the roaring 20s to the swinging 60s. Fashion bloggers also claim that vintage is of higher quality and appears original compared to the similar items we see on high streets today. It can also be argued that people are now more ethically conscious about where their clothes are from, so buying vintage seems more environmentally friendly than buying mass-produced. I went to interview Patrick Bielkowski, a fashion blogger from Manchester whose looks are often inspired by those of the past. He regularly writes pieces on the fashion of different decades on his blog, Babble and Bits, as well as being a keen advocate for vintage shopping. I wanted to gain his input on why he believes vintage is still thriving today and the possible downsides to vintage shopping.
I think vintage fashion is still popular because a lot of people are trying to make more conscious decisions when buying clothes, especially when dealing with like the ethical side and how like fast fashion isn't really ethical. A lot of movies and like that sort of stuff has also influenced vintage fashion quite a lot. The quality and also like the variety you can get at vintage and charity shops is much bigger and greater than you can get at other shops like Urban Outfitters. A lot of the vintage shops are definitely higher priced than all the charity shops, which I think is quite a shame because it means a lot of people can wear vintage or try vintage without having to spend quite a lot of money. Shops are like remaking vintage clothes like flares from the 70s, obviously now being like made in like Urban Outfitters and stuff. So I feel like it's just all coming back.
From what Patrick told me, the rise of vintage is apparent, and it's clear why. People now are trying to take a more ethical approach to shopping, and others are just simply inspired by the trends of the past. However, there are some negatives to vintage shopping, as we've seen, with vintage shops now taking revenue from charity shops who depend on their vintage stock to keep in business. But what do you think?